Hello, puppies. You are welcome to General Studies class. I am Uncle Popo. Uncle Popo is here.
I am also here.
We are here together.
100% attention.
Good. 100% attention is what I need from you. In today's lesson, we are looking at basic science and technology. That's the subject for today. And our topic for today is an interesting one. But before we go into today's topic, let's look at what we discussed in the last lesson. There we talked about the characteristics of living things. And don't forget, we abbreviated it with Mr. Niger D: movement, respiration, nutrition, irritability, growth, excretion, reproduction, and death. That's Mr. Niger D: characteristic of living things. Today, we are looking at another topic in basic science and technology, and that is growing crops with fertilizers. But before that, let's look at the learning objectives. By the end of the lesson, you should be able to identify types of fertilizers and define them, and do the comparison between manures and chemical fertilizers. Let's look at this picture here. This is showing that the vegetation here, we can see how it is a proof that the soil is fertile. Then we can also do some certain things to make our soil fertile to help grow some of our crops, because not all soil that we use in planting that are fertile for different kinds of crops, but when you apply certain chemicals or manures, it will make the soil fertile. One major step in feed preparation for growing crops is to increase the fertility of the soil. You increase the fertility of the soil. Fertile soil will yield a larger amount of nutrients, and plants which get food nutrient from the soil will definitely be of better quality. Plants that are grown in infertile soil will have yellowish leaves, poor sized grains, small fruits, and smaller quality of produce. I will show you the picture of what I'm talking about here. Look at it here. This is a typical example of infertile soil. You can see the yellowish leaf, and they will not have a larger quantity of produce from this. So we need to do something to that. That's we had fertilizer. We'll still talk about that. Growing crops with fertilizers. Now let's define what fertilizers are. Fertilizers are substances that are added to the soil to help crops grow better and produce good yield. Let me repeat it again. Fertilizers are substances that are added to the soil to help crops grow better and produce good yield. This is just an example of how fertilizer looks like. I know some have been hearing about fertilizer, but some of you have not even seen it before. So this is how fertilizer looks like. Moving on to, and when we talk about fertilizer, there are substances that increase the mineral content of the soil. They are substances that increase the mineral content of the soil. So the important minerals that a plant requires are, what are the important minerals that a plant requires? They are, first one is nitrogen, say that, nitrogen. The next one is phosphorus, and plants also require potassium and calcium. So these are the important minerals that plants require: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and what? And calcium. Moving on, let's look at different types of fertilizers or manures that we have. We have different types of fertilizers or manures. The first one is natural fertilizers or manure. Natural fertilizers or manure, that's the first one. And this one comprises of the compost. We have farmyard manure and green manure. That's natural fertilizer, comprises of the compost, farmyard manure, and green manure. Let's look at what we are talking about here. This is an example of natural fertilizer. So we look at those different types we have and discuss them. 2, we have artificial or chemical fertilizers. Artificial or chemical fertilizers. Don't forget the first one I said natural, and the second one is artificial or chemical fertilizer. And that one comprises of ammonia fertilizers, we have phosphate fertilizers, and potassium fertilizers. Just let me repeat it again. Chemical fertilizer comprises of ammonia fertilizers, phosphate fertilizers, and potassium fertilizers. Don't forget, we have talked about 2, natural fertilizer and artificial fertilizer. Now let's talk about manure. Manures are organic substances that are produced from dead and decaying plants and animals and their remains. Manures are organic substances that are produced from dead and decaying plants and animals and their remains. How do we get manure? It's different from the artificial fertilizer that we talked about the other time. Here, it comprises of the dead remains of plants and animals. Their decayed composition will form manure. So they are organic substances that are produced from dead and decaying plants and animals' remains. They supply all minerals elements. All what? Minerals elements needed by plants to grow. Don't forget, we talked about the necessary elements required by plants. We talked about nitrogen when I was teaching you phosphorus, potassium, and calcium. Now, the manure supplies all the elements needed by plants to grow. Plants that grow in soil to which manure has been added will be healthy and green. Just like the first picture that I showed to you, it shows and is a proof that that kind of soil manure was added to it, and that's why we have such vegetation. So plants that grow in soil to which manure has been added will be healthy and green. Now, the fertility of the soil increases. Not only the plant will be healthy, the fertility of the soil increases, and what is the resultant effect of that? It will help to bring higher yields and plant yield better growth when manure is added to such plants. We also have different kinds of manure. Different kinds of manure. Here I have the compost manure. These are derived from waste of animals, plants, vegetable waste, sewage waste, and so on. These wastes are allowed to decay and compost is formed. Next type of manure is farmyard manure. Say that. Farmyard manure. These are derived from cattle dung, remains of plants, residue like leaves, straw, plant pads that are left over after harvesting crops. That's farmyard manure. Next one is green manure. What did I say? Green manure. Now, green manure comprises of the leguminous plants that produce pulses and beans are grown. After the crops are harvested, the plants are plowed back into the soil. These plants provide the soil with nitrogen. This is how we get green manure. After the crops are harvested, the plants are plowed back into the soil. Then this plant provides the soil with nitrogen. You'll see example of what I'm talking about. But now let's talk about artificial or chemical fertilizers. Artificial or chemical fertilizers, they are man-made chemical compounds that are necessary minerals to the soil. So these fertilizers contain 3 elements. Don't forget, still repeating the elements plants require, and I'm still saying it here. Three elements that plant need for healthy growth. These are the nitrogen, and represented with N, phosphorus, that's P, and potassium, the symbol, that is K. Hence, many fertilizers are called NPK fertilizers because of the elements there, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So they are called NPK fertilizer. That's artificial fertilizer. So this is just example of how artificial fertilizer looks like. This is NPK, this is a brand, this is another one. So this is artificial fertilizer, and this is how it looks like when you pour it on the farmland, and it has a way the farmers will do it to mix with the soil. That is artificial fertilizer. In today's lesson, we have successfully talked about what fertilizers are. You were told they are the substances that are added to the soil to help crops grow better and produce good yield. And we also talked about types of fertilizers or manures, the natural fertilizer or manures, and we also have artificial or chemical fertilizer. Kinds of manure, we discussed it: compost manure, farmyard manure, and green manure. It's time to test and see if you have given me your 100% attention in today's lesson. Question number 1, define fertilizer. Question number 2, mention the 3 elements contained in artificial fertilizer. Your time starts now. Eyes on me. Uncle Popo is here. I believe you are still there. Let's mark the questions. The answers to this: number 1, fertilizers are substances that are added to the soil to help crops grow better and produce good yield. 3 elements contained in artificial fertilizer: nitrogen with the symbol N, phosphorus with letter P symbol, and potassium represented with letter K. We have come to the end of today's lesson. Until next time, next lesson, Uncle Popo says, keep on studying. Bye.